I love video games as much as I love anime, and one genre of game that I always want to get into is fighting games. But they tend to have a really poor track record when it comes to being new player friendly. Even the games that tout themselves as being easy enough for anybody to pick up and play fall short of conveying the information necessary to actually teach a newbie how it all works. There's nothing wrong with having move lists a button press away, and in fact they're a fantastic resource. But when I look at multiple pages of commands, my eyes glaze over. Fighting games very easily stop being fun and start being homework. You either sit down and study and learn all of this, or you'll lose nearly every match, and you'll be locked out of seeing your favorite character's best moves. Someone who comes to Injustice 2 because they like DC shouldn't have to memorize a list of complicated commands just to see Green Lantern do cool stuff with his powers. Which is why I'm actually very impressed with Dragonball FighterZ's approach to all of this. They've successfully made a game that's easy to play while being challenging to master. The game uses auto combos, so a few moves that you'd normally have to learn by memorizing some spreadsheet can be achieved by just mashing a single button. A lot of people might think that makes the game too easy, but what it actually does is hook you in and entice you to get better. The very first time you play a match, you are going to do something awesome, whether you intended to or not. You're going to feel that thrill and get a taste of what it's like to be good at a fighting game, even if only for an instant. The game encourages you to mess around with the controls because odds are you'll stumble onto something really cool that can be executed pretty easily. Take the fireball for example. A staple of fighting games at this point is that you move the stick a quarter circle forward and hit the punch button and it fires a projectile. In Dragonball FighterZ, all you have to do is press one button. Hell, you can spam that button and fire them like a machine gun. But if you do take the time to learn how to do the standard fireball motion, it'll shoot out a much better projectile. And that right there is emblematic of everything in this game. You can do things the easy way and get pretty nice, often satisfying results, but as soon as you put in a little work, you start to be able to see your character do higher level things that are cool as hell. It never feels like the good stuff is stuck behind a skill ceiling that you have to bust through. It feels like all the good stuff is always right at your fingertips, and you're always super close to figuring it all out. It's an easy game to start playing, and only gets more and more rewarding as you keep going. And it helps a lot that each character in the game operates under the same basic control scheme, so if you learn how to play one character, you'll be able to jump right in and enjoy any of the rest of them. I won't go so far as to say you learn one, you learn them all, because each character's individual moves do different things, which means you won't be able to apply every character interchangeably in a fight, and you'll still have to plan around specific abilities and team composition. But you'll be coming to each new character with a very strong foundation of how to play them, so you can focus on figuring out the finer details. But not only is this probably the single best experience I've ever had trying out a new fighting game, it also directly addresses and fixes a problem I've always had with video games adapting this franchise. Every single Dragon Ball game with narrative elements has always been focused squarely on retelling the events of the series. Even Xenoverse, which told a brand new story, revolved around traveling to the past in order to relive classic fights that you saw on the show. The narrative of these games were focused entirely on feeding your nostalgia, and the promise of a story was just a means to that end. Dragon Ball FighterZ takes an entirely different approach. It tells an original story set sometime around the beginning of Dragon Ball Super, and is focused squarely on doing something new. That's not to say there's no nostalgia, the game actually has quite a lot. But the brilliance of Dragon Ball FighterZ is that it doesn't rely on the game's narrative to push that nostalgia. Instead, it leaves that largely to the choices made by the player. During the story mode, you have the option of going into each individual battle with whatever team of characters you want. Depending on which characters you pick, you'll get unique cutscenes before the start of the match. If you go to fight Frieza with Android 18, she'll be incredibly pissed off because Frieza killed Krillin back on Namek. Little fanservice moments that make sense based on these characters' histories with each other. But the main way the game handles nostalgia is by baking it right into the combat. The fights themselves are never treated like anything special. They're not the classic fights you remember, just random one-off encounters with no significant place in Dragon Ball canon. But under the right conditions, the moves you pull off become exactly the kind of nostalgia trip you get from the story mode of other games. Let's look at Gohan, for example. Adult Gohan has a super move, which is a giant Kamehameha that he performs with the help of his little brother Goten. But there's a version of that same move where Goku will come out and perform the attack with them, just like in the second Broly movie. What's really creative about this reference is that they managed to weave it into the game's mechanics. See, Goku will only show up if he's one of the 3 characters you selected for your team, and Goten can't show up if Gotenks is on your team, since Goten is obviously fused with Trunks at the moment. What's great about that is that it marries Dragon Ball canon with gameplay mechanics in a way that lets you plan out legitimate strategy and team composition based on nothing but your existing knowledge of Dragon Ball Z lore. And all of a sudden, you just got a crash course in why it's important to pick a team that complements each other's abilities, and were rewarded with an awesome callback to a movie you loved decades ago, which just might win you the match. And the game just keeps on teaching you rewarding lessons by way of bits of nostalgia. Frieza has a move where he throws out 2 Destructo Discs that'll harm the enemy but also come back and hurt you, because that's how his fight with Goku ended. They turned an Easter egg into something that forces you to think about exactly when it would be beneficial to use that move and when to avoid using it, which is a thought process that'll make you better at the game overall as you learn to apply it to all your moves. I expected this to be a pretty good game that I play for a bit while it feeds my love of Dragon Ball, but this ended up being one of the best fighting games I've ever tried to play. This is incredibly easy for me to recommend to anyone, whether you're a Dragon Ball fan or someone who's always wanted to get into fighting games but thought they're all too impenetrable. Or if you're just someone who wants to see what all the hype surrounding this game is all about. If you've got even the slightest curiosity about this game, jump right in and try it out for yourself. I'm betting you'll be there for the long haul. Between the way it plays and the way it looks, this is absolutely a love letter to Dragon Ball Z. They took a beloved series and adapted it into a genre of games that fits it perfectly, and did such a good job of it that this may well be the best video game adaptation of an anime ever made. Arc System Works has set a new standard of quality for bringing anime into this medium, and they did it by making the Dragon Ball Z game that, growing up, I always wished I could play. And when I am playing it, I just can't stop myself from smiling. And that's why I love Dragon Ball FighterZ. But that's just me. What do you guys think of the game? What's your background with Dragon Ball? Is this getting you into fighting games for the first time? Or do you still find the whole genre impenetrable? Let me know in the comments below. And as long as we're on the topic of games, my other channel is in the middle of an entire month of horror Let's Plays. Our 2 main series are The Evil Within 2 and Until Dawn. I'm putting links to the beginning of both those on screen now. Check them out if you have the time. Thank you all so much for taking the time to watch. It really does mean a lot. I'll talk to you all again soon.